Would it rush through an impalpable glow, or would there be a catastrophic explosion of liberated energy? Cort's mind felt so blurred that he could not think clearly. His hands ached and trembled on the wheel. His elbow joints were throbbing. The soles of his feet seemed to be on fire. But he could not stop and rest. Home was not far now, and even then there would be no peace. The road was familiar to him. Wisconsin lay under yellow moonlight, and beside the road the river flowed along silently. They topped a rise and came in sight of the village. It seemed unchanged, but as they swept through it, Cort noticed the absence of lights and movements. The street was completely deserted. From the general store a radio crackled inaudibly. On the store's porch was the body of a man in overalls, grotesquely sprawled. A dog slunk into view, stood frozen for a second, and then fled. Cort thought with alarm of Marion Barton. Had she returned to the laboratory? Probably, but had she fled with the general exodus? Cort's heart jumped as he saw a shining, shapeless glow drift into view from around a corner. A carrier. Another of the horrors was joining the first, but they made no effort to molest the speeding automobile. Cort sucked in his breath. Once he reached the laboratory, all the weapons of his scientific career lay ready to his fingers. Then, knowing as he did the secret of the plague, he could fight, perhaps destroy the plague. And finally, Thordred. Marion could help. Her aid would be invaluable if— "How much farther?" Scipio grunted from the back seat. Li Yang woke up and sleepily rubbed his eyes, yawning. "Almost there," Cort said, a queer breathlessness in his voice. "Just over this rise. Hold on." A glowing shadow had loomed up sinisterly before the car, blocking the road. It was a carrier, silent, motionless, menacing. Cort made a swift decision. He could drive straight at the thing, but that was too long a chance. Going so fast, though, he had little choice. He jammed on the brake, at the same time twisting the wheel. The car's tires rasped and screamed as the vehicle slid sideward. It rolled ominously on two wheels, righted itself, and plunged off the road. The occupants were jolted and flung about as the sedan lurched across a plowed field. A tire blew out with a deafening report. Desperately, Cort fought the wheel. Bang! Another tire had gone, but Cort jammed his foot on the accelerator. In the rear mirror he could see that the carrier was still standing in the same place. It was not pursuing them. He got the car back on the road, picked up speed. As it limped on, the carrier was left behind. Cort drew a deep breath. "Gods!" Scipio bellowed. "I almost stabbed myself with this blade!" Li Yang gurgled with amusement. "You are not as well padded as I, but I am glad our journey is almost over. It is it not, Cort?" "Yes, this is home." Cort's voice died away as he jerked the car to a halt. They were at the huge, rambling structure that had housed the laboratory. The building was gone. It had been razed to the ground in an irregular splotch of blackly charred ruin. A crater yawned among the debris. The laboratory was destroyed, and with it the chance to save the Earth. Sick hopelessness was so strong in Cort that for a long, dreadful moment his heart was numb. He seemed to be dissociated from his body. As if he were a distant onlooker, he stared at the sharp clarity of the ruins under the moon. His shadow stretched out before him on the ochre pathway. On one side was the taller shadow of Scipio. On the other was the obese, dark blotch thrown by Li Yang's form. The grasses rustled dryly in the cool night wind. The embers were still warm, for smoke coiled up lazily from the dying coals. Apparently the work of destruction had occurred lately. Was it an accident? No, Thordred must be responsible. Cort might have expected this. When Thordred acquired his memory pattern, he had also become familiar with the laboratory and all its potentialities. Naturally, he would wish to destroy it, lest use of its powers be used against him. But why had he waited 2 whole weeks? Perhaps because he had not been able to locate the laboratory until now. Despite having acquired Cort's memories, Thordred was a stranger in this new, complicated civilization. "Steve!" The scream cut through the air, bringing Cort around sharply. It was Marian's voice. Chapter 17. Marian. The cry came from the hillside beyond the house. For a second, Stephen caught the glimpse of a white figure running toward him in the bright moonlight. He raced to meet the girl. She collapsed in his arms, panting and disheveled. Her hair was a tumbled brown mass of ringlets. For several minutes she could only gasp inarticulately. "Steve, thank God you're safe. I saw the headlights of a car, but I didn't know it was you. But I thought if you were alive, you'd come back to the lab." Looking down into her eyes, Cort felt a queer tightness in his throat. He interrupted in a voice that was scarcely audible. "Marian, I love you." The girl caught her breath as she stared. Then suddenly she smiled with dazzling brilliance. "I'm glad," she whispered, and pressed her head against Cort's chest. "I'm glad you're human after all." Yes, Cort thought to himself, he was human. For years he had refused to admit it. But now a chuckle started behind his lips. He gloried in it. The others came running up, staring at Marian. She drew away from Cort. "Thordred wrecked the lab," she explained. "Who are these men?" She eyed them inquisitively. "No time for introductions now," Cort snapped. "Tell me what's happened. You've seen Thordred, or you wouldn't know his name." She nodded. "He came here 2 hours ago and destroyed the house. I was the only one who got out alive. I saw the ship not far away. When I started to run, a beam of light flashed out, and I was paralyzed. A huge bearded man came running and carried me into the ship. He seemed to know who I was." "Of course," Cort agreed. "He acquired all my memories with his damned machine." "There was a girl named Jansaya. She didn't say anything. She just watched. Thordred showed me dozens of men and women in the ship, asleep, cataleptic. He said he had captured them to start a new civilization. He was going to another planet, and he decided to take me too. Since I'd been your assistant, Steve, he figured I'd be a good assistant for him. My scientific training would be invaluable to him. He told me you were dead, that he'd killed you with a ray in New York." "So he thinks I'm dead," Cort observed. "That means he didn't know the ray only paralyzed me." Marian didn't look at him as she continued. "I pretended to fall in love with Thordred's wishes, said I'd go with him. So he didn't bother to put me into catalepsy. He started the motors, and the ship began to rise. Then I... "Go on," Cort said gently. "He wasn't watching me. I saw what he was doing at the instrument panel, and I jumped at it. Somehow I pushed all the levers and buttons before he grabbed me. The ship crashed. I wanted to kill Thordred, Steve, because I thought he'd killed you. If you were dead, I didn't want to keep on living." For an answer, Cort drew the girl closer. She went on talking hurriedly. "The ship was wrecked completely. It's right over the ridge. All the prisoners were killed, and Jansaya was hurt. I tried to help her, but Thordred dragged me away. I don't know how he got me out alive. He was like a madman. He salvaged some weapons from the wreck and made me go with him. I don't know why or what he intended. I think he wanted to kill me later, Steve. Slowly." Cort's face was chalk white. Clipping his words, he gave his orders. "Let's find the ship. We may be able to salvage some